Fear is an extremely intense emotion that many of us feel on a fairly regular basis. Now, unless you know how to effectively overcome fear, you understand it, you understand where it comes from, and you understand how to navigate past it, we can find ourselves sitting in a fearful state for quite some time. Some of us maybe even days. Now, fear, in my opinion, is a very interesting topic that has many layers to it. However, at its simplest form, generally speaking, and of course there will be exceptions, fear is the negative emotion that arises based on an expected event that you perceive to be negative. Now, just to give you an example to put that into sort of real world terms, let's say, for example, that someone you don't like works at a certain shop. When you're gearing up to go to that shop, you may have this kind of feeling of fear internally because you're expecting some kind of negative event. They might shout at you, they might fight you, they might be mean to you, they might do XYZ thing. Even just the act of bumping into them and it being awkward may bring up those feelings of fear because it's an expected event that you perceive to be negative. Now, why do we feel fear? What is fear, and why do we find ourselves constantly kind of reliving this event in our mind when in a state of fear? Well, our minds have this amazing ability at pre-planning. Generally speaking, our mind loves familiarity because familiarity equals comfort, and comfort is predictable, and predictable is safe. So our mind absolutely loves being in a comfortable position. This is why very few people will break out of their comfort zone. Now, the reason why when we're fearing an event, we relive it over and over and over again is because our mind is trying to do one of two things. Either A, convince us not to go to the shop so we don't have to live that thing. It's essentially showing you, hey, look, if you go, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen. And this is why so many people will avoid doing things they fear, because their mind has essentially said, if you go, this is pretty much bound to happen. Despite the fact that there's infinite possibilities of what could happen, the mind has latched to this expected event, and therefore to keep you safe, to keep you out of that event, shows you over and over and over again until you avoid it. Now, that's one thing. The other thing that it does is it tries to make that event so familiar in our mind that when it comes to the event, we know how to handle it. Now, the interesting thing about that second point is our mind only ever really does half the job. Our mind makes this event so familiar to us, but doesn't actually ever get to the part where it pre-plans it. For example, it only ever gets stuck really at the they might hit you. It never really goes to, if they hit you, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to handle yourself. You could get the police involved. Maybe there's bystanders that will help. It doesn't ever really get to the planning part to make that event more predictable and therefore more safe. So it just gets stuck reliving the same awful part of the event that we don't want to experience. Now, even though it's doing its absolute best to keep us safe or to make it so that if the worst was to happen, we can overcome it, all it is making us do is experience this awful event. And because the subconscious mind doesn't know what is and isn't real, and the way that we think is the baseline for our emotions, by thinking of this event over and over and over again, our mind is sending the signals to us that we are in this event, which brings this state of fear up, which makes us feel worse, which makes our mind try to react by considering the event, and it's just this awful cycle. And this is why so many people get stuck in fear for days. Now, I've spoken to many clients that might have an event that to you and I may not necessarily be that big of a deal, but to them, it's something that they're fearing, and therefore they're spiraling over it, they're spending days panicking and worrying about it, and they're struggling to get themselves out, because their mind is in that either state of avoid it, red alert, sending off all these signals, or it's trying to familiarize itself with the event to then plan for the event accordingly, but never actually getting to the planning state. Now, fear has two acronyms, and I find them both extremely corny, but they are actually both extremely effective. Now, there are two things you can do with fear. Face everything and run, which is one of the acronyms, or face everything and fight.
Edit in Matthew here, and I realised I said face everything and fight, but it's face everything and rise. I don't know where I got the F from, but apologies.
Now, I was watching a Jordan Peterson talk earlier today, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember exactly what he said word for word because he's a very articulate person. But he essentially said that whenever you are facing something through choice, whether it's something you don't want to experience, whether it's something that's been bothering you for a long time, whether it's morally the right thing to do, your mind is sort of going into it prepared, so to speak. Because you've made the willing choice to target this thing and overcome it, whether it's the fear of like an internal feeling, the fear of an event, or anything like that, because you've made the willing choice to target this thing and address it accordingly, you will be in a state of empowerment because your mind is very much geared up for it. However, on the flip side of that, if you find this event finding you, you are on the back foot and it will stress you out far much more. Your mind will not be prepared for it. You'll be very much in the moment. You'll kind of go into that fight or flight response, and your body will release way more stress hormones than if you were the one to approach this thing. So, because of that, and because of many other experiences in my own life when I've targeted fears from my own perspective and actually overcome them, I will always recommend that you face everything and rise. So, how do we do that then? Well, like I said, there's two things that your mind tries to do. Either one, stop you from going down the path that leads to this event, or two, tries to familiarize the event itself to pre-plan and to then, overcome it accordingly. So regardless of which one you find your mind trying to do, there are two significant things that you can do to aid yourself in overcoming it. The first one, if it's trying to make you run away, consider, why does your mind think that you cannot handle that situation? What is it that you're actually fearing? If you need to, get a pen and paper. It doesn't matter whether it's a physical altercation like my example, or fearing that you're going to message and they're not going to respond, or you're going to open that interview email and they haven't given you the job. Whatever this fear is, because it's all expected events appearing real. So understand why your mind has tricked you into thinking that you cannot win this scenario. Because let's face it, it's our mind basically not believing in ourselves if the first one is the main thing. If I was like a world-class fighter and there was some sort of low-class person trying to fight me, I wouldn't be fearing that event because I know and believe in myself. Or if I was like a supermodel and I sent a message to someone, the chances of them not giving me attention is quite low. So those kinds of people would be handling these situations with severe belief in themselves, therefore probably not experiencing that fear. So if you're fearing it and your body is trying to get you to avoid doing it, it's because your expectation is that of it not going your way. But why does it not have the belief in you for it to go that way? So the first thing to do is to understand if your mind is trying to pull you away from the event, is trying to help is to understand why you don't believe in yourself, or what it is that you don't think that you can do in order to win, quote unquote, that situation. And once you've understood that, then you can start working on it. If it's because you fear that there's going to be a fight, just as an example, start calming yourself. The likelihood of us fighting is very low. Or if we were to get in a fight, I'd be okay. Or, I'm calm and confident in myself. I know that I could de-escalate it. Essentially, you just want to calm yourself down and just build yourself up and build up that belief, for want of a better term. If it's about messaging someone and them leaving you on read, and that's what you're fearing, remind yourself, no, of course they want to talk to me. I'm a really nice and generous and amazing person, so of course they're going to want to talk to me. They're going to be excited to read my message. They're going to be, insert whatever thing helps you overcome that fear in that moment. Actually, work with your mind. It's telling you everything. You just have to read between the lines. It's telling you that you don't have the trust and belief in yourself, so help yourself gain that trust and belief in yourself. That's the first way that I recommend dealing with this first one. Now, if it's the second one, where your mind is just replaying this event over and over and over again to try and familiarize itself, remember, it's not familiarizing itself in the way that it needs to. It's showing you the worst case scenario to help you overcome it, but it's never actually doing the overcoming. So what I recommend you do in those instances is actually to do the pre-planning yourself. This is something that I did when I was fearing going full-time self-employment. This was one of the things that I did when I first started fighting. This is one thing that I did when I have to call out certain people for their behavior, which I've done quite a lot in the past. You'd be surprised how many assholes are in my life. And this is one of the things that I do in those instances. My mind will say, if you call this person out, there might be a fight, and it'll play out this over and over and over again, and I'll feel myself being like, because even though I can fight, because obviously I do boxing and stuff, I don't like fighting in a sense of picking a fight with whoever. I'd rather avoid it if possible, because street fighting is so extremely dangerous. All it takes is the wrong kind of punch, and someone could die, or someone could be severely injured. So my mind is like, okay, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? So in my head, it's showing me this could happen. I need to go the extra step and actually understand the worst case scenario. So I'll use a different example, and I'll use the one of quitting my job, or sort of going full time in this, because my contract was coming to an end naturally anyway. So the decision was more on, do I go full time or do I get another job? Now I asked myself, well, why am I fearing going full time? Well, what if I don't get enough clients to pay the bills? What if I then lose the house because I can't afford to pay for it? What if I lose Katie because I can't afford to pay for the house and she wants to go, even though she's never actually shown any signs of that kind of behavior? What if? It's a fear, it's an expectation. What if? So I sat there with myself and I said, okay, well, let's actually sit here and ponder this worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, I can't afford to pay the bills. What options are there? Well, I could borrow money from my friend. I could take money out on a credit card. I could use government benefits if I need to. I could sell a bunch of things. I could get another job. I could ask Katie for help to pay the bills. I could cut down on expenses so that I could then pay the bills. Just off the top of my head, that's 7 different possibilities that could claw me out of that situation. But there's also the best case scenario. What if I quit my job, put more time in it, and I end up making so much more money? These are the 2 things that I recommend you do. Consider the worst case scenario and overcome it. If you were left on red by that person, what then? I'll just go do something that makes me happy. I'll speak to my friends about it and they'll sort of pick me up. I'll give him some time. Maybe he's just busy. But am I going to die? No. Is it the end of the world for me? No. Do I still have friends, family, money, all these other things going well for me? Yes. So is it really that big of a deal if I get left on red? Well, no, it's not that big of a deal. Yes, I don't want to experience it, but it's not that big of a deal. And then by overcoming this and actually understanding what you would do if the worst case scenario happens, even just that in and of itself is enough to alleviate that fear, because you've actually done what the mind is intending to do, which is the pre-planning element. You've planned. If I get left on red, this is what I'll do. If I don't make enough money to pay the bills, this is what I'll do. If I did end up bumping into that person I don't like, this is what I do. If I did see my person with the third party, this is what I would do. And while you may not still enjoy the event if it was to happen, by at least planning for it and understanding accordingly the worst case scenario and how you would handle it, that will alleviate so much of that fear. I'm not going to say it's going to go completely, because some people will still have, residual feelings and such. But fear is the expectation of an event that we perceive to be negative. So if you can expect the event but understand how you'd overcome it, what is there to concern yourself with? It's just kind of if it happens, this is what I do. Cool, I don't have to think about it again. So that's that. But also, an additional thing to do on that, consider the best case scenario. The best case scenario is you send that message and they say, I'm so happy that you messaged me. Or the best case scenario is I quit my job and I go full time in this and I make so much more money because I'm putting more time into it. Then you have the best case scenario to outweigh or to consider against the worst case scenario. And when your mind actually has other things, you can then expect that event with a positive outlook in mind, therefore leading to excitement as opposed to fear. Using the example at the very beginning of the video, what if my expectation of the event was that it was going to be a fight? This person doesn't like me, I go to the shop, they're there, and it's going to be a fight. But I consider, if it was to happen, I'll de-escalate it, and then I'll talk to them about it. Maybe they're up for talking. Who knows? Maybe they're happy to. And then I consider, okay, well, the best case scenario is that we do talk about it and we actually clear the air. And then all of a sudden you think, okay, well, if we do clear the air, I can then go to the shop freely. I can then maybe even have a new friend. That sounds nice as opposed to running my entire life. And in the worst case scenario, but I've overcome it, is I go there, there's a fight, I de-escalate it. Or maybe I even get myself beaten up real bad. But I just go to hospital, get stitches, and I'm good. That's obviously a bad example, but you get what I mean. Most things are not life and death, but our mind struggles to understand that, which is why it sits in this state of fear. So if you are dealing with some form of circumstance, whether manifestation related specifically or just general day-to-day life, take note of why you're fearing it. Is your mind trying to stop you from going or stop you from pursuing this path? Or is it just simply trying to overcome what the event actually is and plan accordingly? If it's either one of those two, well, it will be one of those two, unless there's an exception that I haven't considered. But once you understand which one it is, you can then act accordingly. If it's because it doesn't believe in yourself enough to overcome this thing, which is why it's trying to stop you from going, start building up that belief. Start comforting yourself. Start being your own hype man. You need a hype man. So start being your own. And if it's the other one where it's just trying to pre-plan the event, consider the worst case scenario and then how you would overcome it. And then consider the best case scenario and consider, is that best case scenario better than that worst case scenario? Most of the time it is, yes. Most of the time, the things that we fear often don't actually end up happening. But when we actually face our fears from a state of us approaching them, it always goes so much better than if you let that thing come to you. So this is all to say, empower the fuck out of yourself and go kick fear's ass. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you lovely people in the next one. Bye-bye.